Well, good evening, Sigma Chi's and all others joining us for tonight's Sig Talk. I'm Jim Cooper, alumnus of the Alpha Chi chapter at Penn State University and currently Vice President of the New York Metropolitan Area Alumni chapter and chair for the Sig Talk program. Now, good health and accessibility to great medical practice is important to all of us, especially those of us entering the golden years of our lives. We are going to focus on these priorities with this evening's Sig Talk by discussing medical devices and technology. Our guest speaker is Sigma Chi alum, Bob Cathcart. Bob has been a professional and executive leader in the medical device and technology field for more than 40 years. Joining me in making inquiries of Bob is Washington, D.C. Alumni chapter member Bruce Kastner. Bruce is an alumnus of the Epsilon chapter at George Washington University. He has served Sigma Chi in multiple roles, including 25 years as a Grand Trustee and chairman of the trustee board for 4 of those years. He's also been the former president of the DC Alumni chapter for 3 terms. Bruce was awarded the Order of Constantine designation in 1995. Now, before we get started in tonight's Sig Talk, just 2 notes. One is, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of Bob once we're done with the interview, please indicate those in the comments section on the right side of your screen, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the talk. Second thing is, we've learned that Bob tonight is out on the West Coast. There have been some storms, and it's interfering a little bit with his Wi-Fi. So if he goes off screen at any time, I think his voice will still be there, but that might happen during the course of tonight's Sig Talk. So it's time to welcome Bob Cathcart and get our Sig Talk started. Welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you, Jim and Bruce. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about 2 of my favorite things, Sigma Chi and medical devices.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Bob, let's start off with your telling us a bit about your professional background. How did you break into the medical device career field? What are the types of positions you've held? And in what medical markets have you participated?
Yeah, sure. So I consider myself very lucky and fortunate to have had the opportunity to work in this space. Like many young people coming out of liberal arts universities with a history degree, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do with that. And I was interviewing for different job opportunities at the time. And I got a call from our head football coach who had recommended me for a position with a longtime friend in the medical device space. And so that gave me an entry into the interviewing process for a job in the wound closure business in medical devices, which I had absolutely no idea about. But it seemed intriguing, and I took the opportunity and hopped on a plane and settled into a sales territory in Madison, Wisconsin. And I traveled all around Wisconsin, working with physicians and hospitals, promoting and selling wound closure devices, namely sutures, needles, and thread. Doesn't seem like there would be a lot to talk about with sutures, needles, and threads, but you would be amazed how complicated and complex that can be in the operating room. So I spent a few years in the sales side of that. The company I was with had a very good sales management track. So I advanced from my territory into a training position and then into management position, and essentially evolved into executive leadership, general management with a number of companies over the years. The predominance of my time has been spent in the cardiovascular space. So that I've learned to love, and that's where I first met Jim at a company called Datascope in northern New Jersey. And I'm currently working with a startup company in the surgical robotics space. So we've advanced beyond wound closure and different implanted devices into robotics, which is a hot, new, interesting field in the operating room and in the hospitals.
And we're definitely going to spend some time on your robotics involvement currently. But look, it's always interesting to hear how careers get started, and yours has certainly been an extensive one in the medical device and technology space. The next question for you, Bob. Medical devices and technology have increasingly merged to generate numerous new products possessing capabilities that have advanced, even revolutionized medical practices. Give us your perspective on how this landscape has changed and grown over the past 25 years.
Yeah, so I think the single biggest paradigm shift in my 40 years has been around who are the decision makers in particular in the operating room or in the area of the hospitals where they are highly specialized. And all my time has been mostly spent in the operating room or in interventional cardiology. And when you go back to the 70s and the 80s, it was kind of the Wild West in medical devices. And the ultimate decision maker, 90% of the time was the end user or the surgeon. So if you could show the surgeon a technology that was better than what they were currently using or game-changing different, that surgeon, regardless of cost, regardless of the impact on the hospital, could walk into management and say, I'm demanding this product. I need this product. And he or she was the decision maker. So as a salesperson or representative of a company, I focus 90% of my effort on the end user, that surgeon. And you could, if you found the right surgeon in the hospital, you could get your products in, again, sometimes no matter what the cost or impact of the hospital. And that has shifted, 180 degrees now, where really starting in the mid to late 80s and into the 90s, and with the Clinton administration and talking about nationalization of healthcare, cost and value, or those in the hospital that are responsible for cost, really have ultimately become the decision makers. So now, regardless of how good your product is or how game-changing it may be, if it doesn't bring value, and that value can be measured in many different ways in a hospital, if it doesn't bring value, it will never get in. And having a surgeon just bang on the door and pound on his desk or her desk and say, I need this, is no longer the way to sell. So you've had to, as a salesperson or a company, really create a much more sophisticated presentation and approach to the business. And it's all around value, driving costs down in hospitals, but also bringing value in different ways. And that has been, again, over the 40 years, the single biggest shift. There have been tremendous new technologies developed, obviously, when you talk about robotics and AI and catheterization and stents and all those things. But today, if they don't bring value, that they won't see the light of day in hospitals.
So, Bob, how would you say, what are the key factors in determining value, and who tend to be the most important decision makers when it comes to assessing that value?
Yeah, so most hospitals today will have what we might call value analysis committees. So when a physician wants a new product, that product will go through extensive evaluation by the value analysis committee to compare it to its existing or competitive products in there and how that impacts care. So does it shorten the length of stay? So if I have a product if I have a patient today that stays 4 days in the hospital, can I shorten that to 2 days? Well, that drives tremendous value for the entirety of the healthcare system. Or can I treat somebody in a more minimally invasive way? So instead of opening the patient surgically wide open and cracking the chest for heart surgery, can I do it through small incisions? Well, that drives increasing value for everybody in the healthcare system. But those value analysis committees will be set up all around the hospital. So as a manufacturer, I have to be able to know how I approach those committees. And what I'm trying to do is bring the surgeon and the committee and me as the manufacturer all together in a room. And how do we figure that out so that it's a win-win situation for everybody?
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that efficacy of the products is still an important thing. But it sounds like cost has worked its way into the equation more and more over the years.
Yeah. We're going to assume efficacy and safety and improvement before
Yep.
you even enter the hospital anymore. Because if you're just a Me Too product, boy, it's a tough place to be a commodity provider these days, because it's hard to drive a lot of increasing value with something that's a commodity.
Yeah, and I guess with these large hospital groups, the evaluation of products has gotten more and more sophisticated too.
Yeah,
All right.
it really started with the group purchasing organizations in the mid to late 80s, the coming together of like hospitals who said we will generate one contract for a product, and if you give us the best price, we will ask all our members to use your product. So you're no longer selling to one surgeon or one hospital; you're selling to a group of hospitals.
Yeah.
In those days, they all didn't comply. So sometimes you would give a great price, and surgeons could still put up a fight and maybe not use your product. But that has really evolved today, where group purchasing organizations and what they call integrated delivery networks, or local hospitals that have come together to all purchase in the most economical way.
All right. Bob, you mentioned earlier that a good part of your career has been spent in the cardiovascular space. One crucial area of well-being important to all of us is cardiac, or more simply put, the good health and functioning of our hearts. Since you're quite familiar with that space, we have a few questions along those lines.
Sure.
Starting with this. We've heard the terminology interventional cardiology to go along with cardiac surgery. What are the key characteristics of these two different medical practices, and how do you envision the future of each?
Yeah, sure. So the treatment of the heart, the surgical treatment of the heart, really began with cardiac surgery. So the ability to cut through the breastbone, open the chest, and a surgeon put their hands on the heart and effect a surgical repair. And with the advancement or the beginning of the heart-lung machine back in the 60s and 70s, that allowed surgeons to do things like coronary artery bypass, to give you new blood vessels supporting the heart, or to give you a new heart valve, so heart valve replacement. And those surgeons really became the dominant force in the hospitals. They were big profit centers for the hospital, and if you were in that space as a manufacturer, boy, those were the golden years. In the mid 70s and then into the 80s became the advancement of what they called interventional cardiology. So instead of opening the chest and being able to put your hands on the heart, you can now insert a catheter, so a thin straw-like tube, into the femoral artery, which is down in your leg, in your upper leg. And a physician could advance that catheter through that hole in the artery all the way up into the arteries of the heart. So they call that interventional, or intervening on the heart. And they're doing it in a obviously a much less traumatic way than opening up the chest. So in the early days, it was balloon angioplasty. So they would take a catheter, insert it into that blocked artery that was causing the heart attack or causing chest pain. And they would put that balloon right where that clot was or clog was in the heart. And they'd open the balloon, and that would expand the blood vessel and allow blood to continue to start flowing again normally through that. But that was never really a permanent repair. It was only kind of a temporary opening. And so the cardiac surgeons were still being called in to eventually treat that patient and surgically replace those arteries or fix those arteries. Advance forward into the early 80s and 80s is when they really came out with the stent technology. So many people are very familiar, and they know family or friends who have had a stent placed in that coronary artery. So instead of the balloon going in to try to open that artery, They now would, advance a catheter with a stent on the end of it. And a stent is a metallic tube. And essentially they could open that tube, and instead of that, and they could leave that tube in the artery in an open mode for the rest of the patient's life. So it's holding the walls of that artery open so that blood can now continue to pass through there. When you go back to the 80s and early 90s, there were lots of complications with those interventional procedures. Stents would close when they weren't supposed to. Stents would move in the blood vessel when they weren't supposed to. Clots would form around those stents because the blood doesn't like things that are in the blood vessel. So the complication rates were 30, 40, 50%. Sometimes you were coming back 2 or 3 times to have that artery opened by an interventional cardiologist. Today, and fast forward to 2024, the failure rates of those stents are less than 1%. So maybe 0.5% of the time, a clot will appear at that stent, or that clotting material that was there previously starts to reform. You may need to come back. Stents today have almost become a commodity because they're so good. So with that procedure of opening the arteries, that was the bailiwick of cardiac surgeons, 30 years ago, is now really the bailiwick of the interventional cardiologist. And cardiac surgeons are looking to do different things than just opening blood vessels or replacing blood vessels in the heart, which was their real go-to procedure, 20, 30 years ago.
Bob, do you think that means there's going to be fewer cardiac surgeons going into the future with the growth of
There
these?
already are a lot. There already are a lot fewer cardiac surgeons today, and more interventional cardiologists. And where the cardiac surgeons are really, really needed today are the more complex procedures. If you're talking about a blockage of 3 or 4 arteries at a time, and maybe a heart valve that is also deteriorating and needs replacement, well, you wouldn't want to try to do all those things at once with catheter-based technologies. So the patient is better served by opening the chest one time, doing all those things at once, and going through that more traumatic procedure, because their long-term result will be better. Do it once and not have to worry about it for the next 15, 20 years. Yep. And there are other cardiac surgeons are doing things now to treat heart failure. Heart failure is something that you'll hear more about with cardiac patients in the future. More patients today survive heart attacks. So less people are dying from heart attacks today because of stent procedures, and hospitals have gotten so good at treating heart attack. But when you have a heart attack, your heart muscle, portions of your heart, are dying from that heart attack. So your heart going forward does not perform as well, and it slowly deteriorates over time, which leads to congestive heart failure, meaning your heart is just not providing the output that it needs over time. And as we get older and older, more and more people will suffer from heart failure. So there are devices now that can be implanted by surgeons and interventionalists to help do things for heart failure. So heart failure is becoming more and more of an area of interest, as are things like atrial fibrillation, that as the population gets older, more and more people are suffering from the kinds of chronic heart disease.
Bob, you've anticipated a lot of my next question, so I don't have to really cover too much of it. But I did wonder, with the constant improvement of stents that are placed in the coronary arteries, what are the companies that are really prominent in developing and producing those stents?
Yeah, so most of the stent market has aggregated around 3 companies. That's Abbott Medical, Medtronic, and Boston Scientific. J&J was huge in that space for many years. They were leaders in that space very early on. but they had a number of different issues that led them to divest their stent business. And I think that resides at Abbott now. I can't be sure about that. But those three companies make up the predominance of it. But what you've seen them do is, that stent business becomes a core of what they're selling to a hospital. And so they developed new technologies around atrial fibrillation, heart valve replacement, heart failure, that are more specialized and are not commodities by any stretch. And so they use that base of stent business to be able to add in these new technologies and build their cardiac business, in that way.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Medtronic. Bruce is going to be asking you a little bit later about Medtronic, because a very well-known Sigma Chi ran Medtronic for about 10 years and really helped the company grow quite a bit. All right. I'm going to move on to another question related to cardiac.
Sure.
One of our Sigma Chi brothers, Dr. William DeVries, was the surgeon who in 1981 implanted the first artificial mechanical heart, known as the Jarvik 7, in a human patient, somebody named Barney Clark. We do not hear so much anymore about coronary treatments using mechanical hearts. What's happened to that arena of the cardiac medical practice?
Yeah, and Bill DeVries did that implant right out here at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. So what happened with Barney Clark and the Jarvik heart has basically what has happened with most attempts to implant a mechanical heart to survive a patient, to essentially allow that patient to live, many years off that heart, is they fail traditionally. And there are really two reasons that have not yet been overcome for the long-term use of those devices. Number one, the body's own immune system sees this big implanted thing in the chest, and it goes off in a frenzy and says, you need to get that out of here. The immune system fights it. And in many cases, the physicians will try to suppress the immune system so that it doesn't fight that new heart. But by suppressing the immune system, you allow all other kinds of things to happen negatively for the body. So overcoming that, the body's own immune system fighting that heart. Secondly, by putting these metallic or plastic devices, blood does not like that. So when blood passes through there, one of two things is happening. Clots are forming around those devices, and those clots will eventually break free, and they'll end up in the lung or in the brain, and that is disastrous for a patient. Or blood passing through those devices, the cellular structure of the blood will actually break down. The cell walls of blood cells will break down, and blood becomes damaged, and the body doesn't like that either. So nobody's essentially really been able to overcome that for the long term, for leaving that in the patient. So those devices that are out there today are essentially used in the very short term. They're implanted, and that patient will have them implanted, what we call bridge to transplant. So they'll put that into the patient, and the patient will only have that device in until a human heart becomes available or a donor heart becomes available. Then they'll take that mechanical heart out and implant the human transplanted heart. So it's called bridge to transplant. So the FDA has approved 3 or 4 different devices for bridge to transplant. They've yet to approve a device for survival, for keeping a patient. And there are two companies out there at least that are working on clinical trials for full-time implanted mechanical hearts. It remains to be seen whether they'll be able to prove it. There are a lot of challenges to be overcome there.
It sure sounds like it. So transplants of real hearts are still a major factor in helping cardiac patients survive. I have a quick little side story to tell related to that. Back when I was with the same medical device company that we both worked for, Bob, I was interviewing a candidate for a VP of marketing job. I think it was for the division you worked for. And, he told me at that time that the startup company that he was working for was working on developing an artificial heart product. And one of the things he mentioned was that the reason they thought this was viable in terms of the market for the product was that more and more states were passing legislation or regulations that required motorcycle drivers to wear helmets. And because of that, more people were surviving crashes in motorcycle accidents, and that a lot of motorcyclists were young, healthy men who, unfortunately, in cases where they weren't wearing helmets, were perishing in these accidents, and their hearts, in many cases, were being used for transplants. So it's amazing the way certain things develop, that you would never think of, and it related to a medical marketplace. Okay.
Sure.
Bob, a little more than 20 years ago, as we've mentioned already, both of us were working for a mid-sized medical device company called Datascope Corp. And at the time, you were the vice president of sales for the cardiac assist division, which was the largest and most profitable division of the company. Now, cardiac assist developed and produced machinery and disposable medical balloons and catheters for a therapy called counterpulsation balloon pump therapy. Not many people have heard of this, but it's a very critical therapy that keeps people alive who have distressed hearts. What exactly is the therapy, and how does it benefit a cardiac patient?
Well, I know we have limited time here because that answer could take 45 minutes on itself. But,
all right, we'll take the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah. So essentially, it's counter pulsation therapy. So when the heart beats, and the heart beats normally for a patient 60 to 70 times a minute, it goes through two cycles. The heart contracts, and that contraction pushes blood out of the heart into the rest of the body. And then the muscle relaxes. And while it relaxes, blood comes from the venous system into the heart and then onto the lungs to be oxygenated so that it can be sent out the heart. And that happens every 60 to 70 times a minute. So what counterpulsation does, we would take a big balloon and we would put it up in the aorta, I guess over here, right outside the heart. And when the heart contracted, when the heart relaxed, we would inflate that balloon, and that change of pressure in the aorta, so increasing the pressure, would help the heart push blood out into the body, because the heart was distressed and it wasn't pushing very well. So by inflating the balloon, we increase the pressure in the vasculature, and we help push blood out to the rest of the body. And when the heart is ready to relax, we would relax the balloon, and that would lessen the pressure in the vasculature or in the heart, and that would allow blood to flow more freely into the heart on the other side of the heart. So we called it counterpulsation. So the balloon was inflating and deflating counter to the normal heartbeat. And it would assist the heart in those two functions of contracting and relaxing and pushing blood out of the heart and accepting blood into the heart. The beauty of this technology was that no patient who is distressed in a cardiac emergency is beating at 60 to 70 beats per minute like a normal human. The heart is either beating really slow or it's beating really fast. And so we had sensors in this catheter that would tell our pump how fast that heart is beating. And that would tell how quickly we had to inflate and deflate that balloon. And we could inflate and deflate that balloon up to 150 times a minute in order to impact the heart. It was an amazing piece of machinery. And so that function, that counterpulsation, would assist the heart. So if somebody came into the hospital with a severe heart attack and they were really what we call circling the drain. Everything with all functions were dropping. They would put this balloon in to provide short-term support, maybe for the next 12 hours till we could get them to the operating room. Or if they were in the operating room for a coronary bypass surgery, and the heart had been asleep during that procedure for 6 or 7 hours, sometimes waking that heart up during that procedure is often difficult. So we would put the balloon in to assist that patient coming off the bypass machine. So any situation where the heart was struggling in the short term, we could use that balloon, and it saved countless lives. And we had a tremendous staff of people that would work hands-on with physicians in operating rooms and emergency rooms, in ambulances and in air ambulances, helping them insert the balloon and regulate the machine. We had a 24-hour call center where nurses would call us at 3 o'clock in the morning. This patient was dying. Help me, tell me what I need to do with this balloon pump to get it working correctly. And we would literally listen to them save a life. It was just an amazing experience to be a part of that. And the company was #1 in this field and still is after many years.
And as I recall, it was a really good business too, because you had a very sophisticated piece of machinery in the pump, as well as disposable products with the balloons and the catheters that had one-time usage. So there was this continuous selling of the disposable products as part of the therapy. The last question I have for you on the cardiac space would be one of the companies you worked for after Datascope was Hansen Medical. They were involved with robotics products for cardiac surgery until they sold their business to Johnson & Johnson. Just tell us a little bit about how robotics are being used in cardiac health.
Yeah, so in the interventional space, so this driving of catheters, the movement of catheters in through the vasculature is very challenging. So a physician, an interventional cardiologist, developed really good hands to be able to do this. As well, they watched these catheters moving up into the vasculature, even up into the brain, by creating an X-ray. And they could see where that catheter was in the vasculature by creating this X-ray right in front of them. And sometimes during a procedure, they would create 30, 40, 50, 60 X-rays as they were winding through this procedure for 3 or 4 hours. So there were a couple of different things. The physicians had to be very good to be able to drive these catheters by hand. And you had really good ones and you had maybe not so good ones. What we did with the robot was to create a catheter that the robot could essentially steer itself. So this physician could see this X-ray or see this image, and by simply pressing a button, he could direct that catheter to go forward, turn left, turn right, bend 180 degrees. And it was an amazing, and we could reach areas in the body that even the best interventional cardiologists, intervascular radiologists couldn't do. And so patients that might have had to have surgery because the interventionalist couldn't treat them, they could be treated with the robot because that catheter could essentially go anywhere. The other thing was that those 30 or 40 or 50 X-rays that the interventionalist was taking to see where he was going was hard on the patient because that's radiation. It's hard on the physician because it's radiation. And the physician would wear 15 pounds of lead during these 3 or 4 hour procedures to protect them from the radiation. So that created back problems, knee problems. They were standing for 3 or 4 hours. So with the robot, they could sit outside of the room, outside of the whole radiation field, and simply drive the robot by pressing buttons and drive that catheter up into amazing spaces in the body. So it's really the advancement of catheter technology. It's really cool.
That's really something. And I think a great example of how technology and medical devices have merged to create, breakthroughs in the way patients can be treated.
Sure.
So we've spent a good amount of time on the cardiovascular area. I'm now going to turn it over to Bruce, give him the challenge of compressing another set of questions into about 20 minutes. So Bruce, why don't you take over from here and explore a few other areas with Bob where he's had experience.
Thanks, Jim. Bob, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Yeah.
Let's move from the scientific side to the management side of the industry. Another one of our Sigma Chi brothers, Bill George, was chairman and chief executive officer of what today is the largest medical device company in the world, Medtronic Corporation. Brother George was the top leader at Medtronic for 10 years from 1991 to 2001. During his tenure, the company grew from $1 billion to more than $5 billion in annual revenues. That's almost $9 billion in today's dollars. Bob, as an executive in the same industry, what are your impressions of what Bill George accomplished as its corporate leader in those 10 years?
Yeah, sure. So I've only had the pleasure of meeting Bill once, and it was on a very, very short basis. But you know, he's a great example of two things, and this is what I hear from people that work for him. Number one was culture. He built a tremendous culture within that organization where people really love to work for Bill. They love to work for Medtronic. Secondly, you mentioned the years that he was there from 91 to 2001. That was the height of that era where things were moving from being specialty technology based, surgeon driven decision making to economic decision making. And there were many companies that fought that along the way, because the first impression was, well, that's only going to eat into my gross margins because they're going to drive costs down. I want to keep my margins up, so I want to keep my surgeons happy and let them make decisions. But I think Bill kind of read the tea leaves and saw how that was going. So Medtronic was traditionally a company that was in pacemaking. That's pacemaking and heart valves. That's where they really started at. High-end technology driven by physicians. I'll pay for the best, and that was Medtronic. But Bill and Medtronic essentially said, we need to grow by bringing more products into our bag, and we need to sell on value, and we need to partner with hospitals as opposed to fighting them over these cost issues. And I think Bill and Medtronic were really at the forefront of that in the period of time that he was there. And it really shows today that they're not only a cardiac company, they're across almost every specialty in the hospital today.
For our brothers who might not know about Brother George, in addition to the accomplishments that we've just discussed, he was the professor of management practice at the Harvard Business School from 2004 to 2022 and continues there as an executive fellow. He is a deeply committed Sigma Chi, having endowed to the KTLW Transformational Leadership Program with multi-million-dollar gifts and providing rich content for the True North Leadership Workshop. Bill was also the youngest Grand Trustee in the 121-year history of the board, having been elected at the age of 29. He inspired me to aspire to become a Grand Trustee at a fairly young age. I had the honor of joining the board at age 33, so I didn't set any records, but I was still an upstart at the time. Bob, you are currently executive chairman of the board of AIM Medical Robotics. Previously, you held positions as president and CEO at AIM for 3 years. So AIM is a startup company. What are the products under development, and what medical markets will it serve when it's completed and approved for sales?
Yeah, so I joined AIM based on my background in surgical robotics, and our particular product is in the field of neurosurgery. So there are really a couple of different reasons why you operate in the brain. One is for cancer, and then the other is for motor dysfunction, Parkinson's, epilepsy, those kinds of things. And operating in the brain is not like operating in the abdomen or the chest, where you widely open things up and put your hands in. You really have to be very careful about entering the brain and advancing any instrumentation into the brain at all. So the way they do that today is to create an image or a plan from a CT, and they'll advance instruments based on a roadmap that they've created before the procedure. But once you open the brain, things tend to shift around, things can move, swelling can occur. And so so procedures fail because targets deep in the brain are missed by the surgeon. And they really have no way to see it. So they're relying on that preoperative map. It's like getting a GPS target 20 years ago and then running into a detour and not being able to redirect yourself on GPS. So what our technologists and our inventor has done is creating a robot that can actually work in an MRI. So an MRI is essentially a huge magnet, but it's also the safest way to take an image because there's no radiation involved. Everybody would love to do things in an MRI, but it's a big magnet. You can't have any metal around or it will distort the image and send things flying around the room. So he's created a robot that can be used in the MRI. So it's made out of certain plastics and other materials, et cetera, et cetera. So now that physician can start the procedure and operate in the MRI and advance with the robot advancing instruments deep into the brain, and can at any moment take a picture of the brain in the MRI and say, wait a minute, I'm off by five millimeters. I need to adjust to my target. Robot, can you move my instrument 5 millimeters to the right and advance it 3 millimeters down? They really don't have any way of doing that today. They can't see things in the brain once the procedures start. And it's always been limited because they can't do it in the MRI. And now we're developing a robot that allow them to do that in the MRI. And so we are about 4 months away from treating our first patient at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where we're kind of headquartered. And once we do that, then we'll be looking to do further testing and further development based on those outcomes, and then eventually submit to the FDA for approval. My feeling is that we would probably be commercializing somewhere in 2026, in 2 years from now.
That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to having this hit the market. One additional question about a future or possibly even current factor for medical device technology. In what ways will artificial intelligence have impact in its use in medical devices and technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that's one that remains to be seen. It seems that there would be a great opportunity there, and I think there will be. I can give you a current example of where it's working today, and people will reference this one that are in the space, and that's in radiology. So, for instance, a radiologist will come into the office in the morning, and there may be 50 images from the prior day that radiologist has to sit and look at and evaluate as to the severity of an injury, what the next steps need to be, et cetera, et cetera. And he's doing that based on his or her experience. With AI today, there are companies and universities that have essentially put millions of these images through AI. And AI can very effectively, at a high rate of concurrence, tell you exactly what that image is supposed to tell me, with a high rate of specificity and appreciation. So now that radiologists, instead of looking at 50 images in the morning, may only have to look at 4, because the other 46, the AI has already said, this is what it is. And you don't have to look at it, because I've looked at a million other images and I know that's exactly what is happening there. So the most complex images, I still want my radiologist to look at and tell me exactly what's going on there. So they become much more efficient in being able to do it. And so they can spend their time doing more important things rather than looking at 50 kind of mundane mundane images. And of course, they can do that more cost effectively, and that helps everybody in the system. So that's a practice that's happening today with AI, and you could kind of go from there and see where the diagnosis of disease is essentially where AI, I think, is going to have the biggest impact, in the years to come. Genetic sequencing, all the things that you're hearing about that AI can do more effectively and quicker than maybe the human eye can today.
Well,
thank you, Bob. That's great stuff. Jim, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Well, it certainly sounds like AI is going to have a major impact on medical practice over the next quarter century, and who knows what there is to come, but it'll probably be very important and dramatic. Bob, we have a couple of questions for you to finish up our interview, and then I understand there are a couple of questions that have come in from the audience too, so we'll get right to it. I'm sure there are Sigma Chi's, young Sigma Chi's listening in tonight, or going to listen to our recording of this Sig Talk, and maybe even some of their parents of young men and women who are just starting their careers. What advice would you have for a young person coming out of college who wants to get into medical device sales or biomedical engineering?
Yeah, so I love the space. I think it's not one that's well known to people. So if somebody who's looking to get into it, I would wish them the best of luck and say, go for it. There's been a pretty significant change in how salespeople are coming into the space over the last 5 years. And this is something, if anybody's young and coming out of school, or even young maybe after their first job and are thinking about it, there are now what they call medical device colleges are scattered around the United States. And essentially for about $10,000, you can go to this medical device school, and they will essentially teach you how to be a medical device rep over a 3 or 4 month period of time. And they're very good at what they do. These are all people that come right out of the industry that have been doing it for many years. And that they're very focused. They say, this is what you do to be a medical device person. And they have a very high placement rate. All the Medtronics of the world, Boston Scientific, they all are using them now because they essentially know exactly what these young people are being trained to do. They place about 98% of the people that come through there, and they're coming into entry-level medical device jobs. But those medical entry-level jobs may not have been available to somebody in the past for 6 or 7 years after they graduated from college. They would have been told, go do something different, sell something different, then come back to us. Now they're doing it right out of college. You can Google medical device college, they'll pop right up, or anybody that wants to reach out to me, I'd be glad to point you in that direction. But it's really been a nice sea change, and I've recommended probably a dozen people there over the last couple of years, and they've all been thrilled with how it's worked out for them.
Bob, what would you say, from your experience, what would you say is the most important characteristic somebody would have in order to be a successful medical device sales rep?
I guess getting into the job, we used to call it courage. And it's, my first day on the job, my trainer put me into a hospital gown and gloves and a mask. And we walked right into a cardiac surgery operating room, and he put me right next to the patient on the table with an open chest, and I'm looking right at a beating heart. If you're not up for that, this isn't the space for you. And I think it's your ability to communicate, in a very sophisticated way with very smart people, and not never underestimating how smart these people are, and in coming into it wanting to partner and want to create solutions. This is not selling because I'm trying to make a commission. It's really creating solutions and thinking about the long term, your relationship with the physician and with the hospital, and where you can build from there.
Yeah, one thing I can tell the young people out there from my days working for a medical device company and being involved with the compensation management there is that if you are a highly successful sales rep in the field, you can make a very lucrative living in medical device sales. Bob, one more question for you, and then we'll address a couple from the audience. We always like to ask our speaker to tell us about the impact that Sigma Chi has had from your undergraduate days and into your adult life. What's the impact been on both your personal and professional life?
Yeah, it's probably not unlike others. The brothers from Sigma Chi. I just created some really, really true long-term friendships and bonds with the guys from our chapter at DePauw. There are 5 or 6 of them that continue to be my closest friends today. We do things together every year. We talk almost daily, and they've all been very successful professionals. So from moving from just the pure friendship side of it, they have become mentors to me. Some of them are doctors, and I've been able to go to them and say, how can I change and influence things in the medical device business? How should I behave differently? How should I do things? Others are attorneys and professionals. They've really become mentors to me, and I've called on them from the business professional side over the years, many different times. It's just been, it's just had a profound impact on me, professionally and personally.
Well, that's a great description here of the impact that Sigma Chi has had for you, and it sounds like it's really added value to your life, which we're very gratified to hear about.
For sure.
So, with the few minutes that we have left tonight, I understand we have a couple of questions. So, if our producer could put the first question on the screen, let's go. From Denzel Dixon. Hello, Bob. My name is Denzel, and I am a SIG from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, a 2023 grad. I currently work as a product analyst at J&J MedTech. What tactics can my team use to support the sales reps within our organization?
Hi, Denzel. Thanks for your question. And the founder of our technology is actually an RPI grad, so we have some connection there. I think for anybody that's an internal employee in the company versus external, meaning sales, internal meaning coming from, if you can get out into the field and work with salespeople or clinical people, spend a day, spend a week, see what it is that they're how they're engaging on a daily basis, what they're experiencing on a daily business. To me, that's kind of the most important thing. We did that with our engineers all the time. We made our engineers go to the field. We made our salespeople come into the office and see what the engineers were doing on a daily basis, so they could understand the pressures the engineers were under. So it wasn't just, make something, make it faster, make it better, get it out to me. We wanted our salespeople to understand what the process was that's driven by, the FDA and regulatory quality, et cetera. So any field interaction you can do is great. And I'm just basing that on trying to kind of interpret what your product analyst role is at J&J. But that any experience you can get out in the field, putting yourself in front of the customer, interacting with customers, is always a win.
And Denzel, it sounds like you're headed toward medical device technology in your career. Do we have a second question for Bob? Is the oversaturation of investment into AI in the healthcare negatives affecting non-AI machine learning technology development? I'm not sure that I completely understand that question. Maybe you do, Bob. I'm from Stannis Van Hapsburg.
Yeah, I'm chuckling already because so for somebody who's raising money from venture capitalists for a robotics product, I am constantly competing for the attention of those venture capitalists who are pouring all their money into AI. So, like, I don't want to offend any venture capitalists who might be on the phone, but on the meeting, but there's always a rush to what is new and hot, and we see that right now. So yes, absolutely. I think non-AI, non-machine learning technology development will suffer, and it probably is suffering because so much of the venture money is going. Venture money right now is tight. Coming out of COVID and some of the downside of the market a couple of years ago, venture money is tight, and venture is backing probably more AI than anything else in healthcare, and I think that is to the detriment of non-AI technology.
So AI is the shiny new object, and it's getting more than its fair share of attention. It sounds like from what you're describing, Bob.
To a great degree, it should get attention. I think there's fabulous opportunity there in the long run, but hopefully there's something left for the rest of us that are raising money. And robotics companies will essentially be employing AI as well. If we do 1,000 procedures with our robot, we will track every movement, every action that occurs in that procedure, every image that occurs in that procedure, and AI will tell us after that first 1,000 procedures how we can do it better. So it is coming, but not so much in the operating room yet.
Bob, I have one final question for you that the audience may be interested to hear about. Would you say the United States is the leader in the development of new medical device products and the use of technology on a worldwide basis?
Yes, for sure. I think it is, and it has been. That's not to say that tremendous things aren't happening overseas, but I just think there's more money has poured into biotech, medtech, pharmaceutical in this country. More is happening in our universities. More is happening in our major medical institutions like a Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic or the Brigham and Women's. There's just more of everything. What changes from time to time is the regulatory pathway. Sometimes it's easier to take your product to Europe first because the regulatory bodies in Europe may be more amenable to approving things earlier and with less information versus the FDA. Those tides kind of shift back and forth across the ocean. But to me, certainly the U.S. has been at the forefront and will likely continue, for years to come.
Bob, this concludes our SIG Talk. We can't thank you enough for giving us your time, your knowledge, and your wisdom about medical devices and technology. I'm really glad I called upon you to be a SIG Talk speaker, and thank you again.
Everybody, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. I love the opportunity, and Bruce, thank you for your participation and questions as well. It's been great.
And just a note for those who know people who may have missed tonight's talk, the talk will appear on the Sigma Chi Learning Consortium within a few days. And so please tell your friends and colleagues about tonight's talk. It certainly is a worthwhile one to tune in on for the recording. So I'd like to say good night to everybody. We'll be back within a month for another SIG Talk. So look for our promotion of a SIG Talk toward the end of March or early April. Good night, everybody.